Hello. My talk is about how security is hard, but before I talk about security, I guess I was just introduced. I'm also indirect on the internet, and that's my avatar photo, if you recognize that from some internet thing. As he just said, I work at Cloud City Development in San Francisco. We do app development and web app development work, and I do training and kind of joining teams and working with them on architecture stuff and pairing and helping people out when they are confused about writing code. If that's a thing that your team could use, that's a thing we do. I wrote a book. It's called The Ruby Way, 3rd edition. I guess I didn't really write it, but I rewrote it. The 2nd edition was really great, but only covered Ruby 1.9, and the 3rd edition covers Ruby 2.3, and it's pretty awesome. It's basically a bunch of ways to use Ruby to do things, so it's kind of the opposite of the normal Ruby book, where it's like, here's every single thing that Ruby will let you do. It's like, here's things that you'd want to do, and here's how you do them in Ruby. I work on Bundler. Working on open source has turned out to be really hard, but it's a great way to learn about Ruby and to learn about the Ruby community and to learn about what people actually do with Ruby, which, to be honest, before I worked on Bundler, I had basically no idea what anyone did with Ruby except companies where it actually worked. So one thing that we've been doing lately with Bundler is trying to make it easier for people to get started contributing to open source if that's something that they're interested in. Definitely email me or tweet at me if contributing to open source is a thing that you've wanted to do, but you're not really sure what to do that. We have kind of documentation set up and people who work on the team who are willing to help. So, security. It's hard. I feel like a typical response to things being hard is to give up. Unfortunately, in the case of security, we can't go shopping even though it's hard. This is very sad. So let's talk about why that is for a minute, and then I'll talk about what you can do about it. So you may not know this, depending on how long you've been a Rubyist. There was a time where Ruby had security releases like maybe once a year, maybe every other year. It was a thing that happened sometimes, but you didn't have to think about it that hard, and it wasn't something that was super often. More recently, this has been more of a problem. There was a time recently when this happened a lot. It was like a 3-month period where there was a release every single month, and the core team was actually pretty embarrassed about it. They were like, there's a new version, I'm very sorry. Kind of similarly, in the same time frame, there's this short time period where there's like, oh, what? It's another weekday? Here's another Rails security release. This is a lot of more releases than there have been previously. Fortunately, things have quieted down a little bit since that kind of epically bad time. But even recently, there was like 6 Rails security releases in one day. So normally, when I start to talk to people about this, and we're like, oh, security release, CVE, whatever, whatever, and people are like, wait, what's a CVE? I'm confused. So people seem to be like, oh, a CVE, that means security problem, right? That's true. But more details can be helpful. CVE stands for Common Vulnerabilities and Exposures. Each CVE is ultimately just a number issued by the MITRE Corporation. Like there's a company, and they were like, hey, I know what we'll do. We'll make a numbering system for security vulnerabilities in software and sell it. And people bought it. I don't. So somehow, MITRE has convinced everyone from the US government to like every large corporation that makes software to use their numbering scheme. And so MITRE, the company, issues blocks of numbers to what they call numbering authorities, which is companies like Oracle, Apple, Microsoft, Red Hat. Like if you're big and you make software, you probably get numbers directly from MITRE. And then those companies assign those numbers directly to actual security vulnerabilities. The Red Hat security team does a lot of work with Ruby things. Red Hat builds a lot of stuff that depends on Ruby working. And so Red Hat has been issuing CVEs for Ruby and Ruby gems out of their bucket of numbers. You can look up every single CVE that has ever been assigned at both the National Institute of Standards and Technology US government website and the MITRE website where they keep track of all the CVEs. And it's actually kind of cool because it's a way to be sure that you and someone else are talking about the exact same problem. Because as we just saw, you can't say, oh, hey, remember that bug that came out in Rails and was a security problem on Wednesday last week, because there might have been 4 of them. So this is a good way to keep track of what exactly went wrong, what you can do about it, and how you can get the version that's fixed or give up and just go home and cry sometimes. Rails bugs, like those, Ruby bugs, it's kind of, the pace has picked up a lot in the last maybe 2 years. Kind of historically, Ruby has been a really nice community. We talk about how Matz is nice and we're nice, and that means that everyone's nice, and isn't that lovely? And this, I guess, what really precipitated this change is that someone said, hey, Ruby's really easy to write code in. I know, I'll write something that lets me automatically exploit security vulnerabilities in Ruby. And then security researchers were like, oh, hey, Ruby, that's cool. And then the security researchers were like, wait a second, Ruby, oh man, this is, and it didn't end well. So security researchers now know that Ruby is a thing, and they now know that for most of Ruby's history, we've just been like, yay, everyone's nice, whatever. And so this is now kind of a problem. Unlike Matz and Ruby historically, I guess in some ways, slightly different. But in other ways that they are different, we can learn from them. Rails is totally leading the Ruby community in dealing with security problems, because Rails is really historically the only thing that had to even deal with security researchers at all. Ruby could be super problematic, and no one really cared because nobody even paid attention to Ruby, but all these sites were running Rails, so if they found a problem with a site running Rails, it was suddenly the Rails security team's problem. And so the Rails security team is like the most concentrated, distilled experience with security issues that we have in the Ruby community. And so let's talk about how to learn from their sad, horrifying experience. Rails 3, which is actually not that new anymore, but it made some changes to Rails, where Rails used to be this big monolithic thing, and you just use Rails. Rails 3 was like, oh, hey, we're going to make everything modular. There's going to be a little piece for every single thing, and you can use them all together. But guess what? Every single one of those things now has separate chances for security issues. So in one 8-week period, there were security issues in with fixes in a release of Ruby gems, bundler, JSON, XML, rack, RO, active record, action pack, active support, and RDoc. Yeah, RDoc. It's a static documentation generator. It had a security issue. And that was just 8 weeks. So that was a really bad 8 weeks, but this is a problem. So what do you do? Just keeping up with this is actually kind of problematic, to be honest. 8 weeks that was a lot of things. So how do we handle problems with other people's code? Unfortunately, constant vigilance is the answer. So let's outsource that constant vigilance to a computer rather than having to do it ourselves. But we do actually have to pay attention, because when those problems happen, it can be really bad. While updating is a huge pain, and there's kind of this continuous ongoing tension that you're probably familiar with as a software developer, right? There's strong cultural consensus that applying security updates is important and really great, and you should do it, and why aren't you doing it already? And unfortunately, it's rarely spelled out exactly why that's so important. And on the other side, there's the business people who are like, why aren't you shipping that feature that I asked for? What is this security update that you just spent the last 3 days working on? So the best tool that I've seen to explain this to people who aren't developers and who aren't already immersed in this automatic cultural, what do you mean you aren't applying security updates? Of course you apply security updates. So the explanation that I found works the best is that updating is insurance. It's really analogous to insurance for someone hacking you. You pay a relatively small amount of effort over a long period of time, and you avoid a relatively small chance that you'll be hacked, right? Like, very similar to insurance, where you pay a relatively small amount of money over time to offset the relatively small chance that something catastrophic will happen. So it's a small cost. It mitigates a relatively small risk, honestly, right? Like, hackers have to target you out of every single other existing buggy, vulnerable thing in the world, and there's a lot of them. But without that insurance or security updating, failures are super, super catastrophic. Just cleaning up from a single security breach can take down your site for an impossible to estimate amount of time. This happened to rubygems.org, and it got hacked, and we said, wait, we don't know if someone snuck in and replaced the Rails gem with their own like Trojan horse for any gem of all the gems. And so we like had to take the whole thing down and manually like download and check and verify, is this the thing that we think we uploaded whenever it was uploaded? Is this, and we had to go, there's like 100,000 gems. It took forever. It can require tons of engineering time. It can require tons of lawyers. People get really mad when you lose their private details because of a security breach. There are a lot of legal obligations around getting hacked and then having to do things. In the States, it's really terrible. Every state has a different law about what you have to do if you get hacked. So many lawyers. Right, like depending on the state you're in, you might have to disclose, you might be liable for things that people suffer as a result of you having lost their details. It's really complicated. Someone who makes more than me would have to like tell you what is actually true for your company, but this is a perfect example of why this is really catastrophic, and it's much better to just apply the security updates than to have to deal with all of this. So, in conclusion, updating is really hard work, but it's actually worth it. Continuous low-level cost vastly reduces the chances that you'll have to deal with a really high-cost, high-stress, catastrophic situation. Do your updates, sleep well at night, tell your boss that this is why this needs to happen. So, now that we've talked about why this is important and how to talk to people about how it's important, what do you do when you find problems? Like, how do we talk to each other about security issues, right? Fortunately, the InfoSec community has existed for much longer than the Ruby community, and they've had to already deal with these kinds of questions. And so they've kind of worked out a middle ground compromise, and it's called responsible disclosure. This is like the best thing that we've worked out after years of trying lots of different things. It is the worst, except all the other options, which are even worse. It's the best we have so far because everyone ends up unhappy and kind of mad at the other person who was involved, but no one who was involved actually ends up screwed over, which is what we were trying to avoid in the first place. So let me break it down. Disclosure, the disclosure part of the responsible disclosure. Companies absolutely hate this. No one wants to admit that they got hacked. No one wants to have their name associated with those people who got hacked. It's really damaging to your reputation. Lots of companies go to incredibly absurd lengths. We claim copyright on the bug in our program. You're not allowed to tell anyone about it. We're suing you because we own the copyright on that bug. It's ridiculous. So the responsible part, people who find the vulnerabilities just hate this part because it means that they can't tell anyone that they did it until after it's fixed. There's rules around that. You want to like provide people with a reasonable amount of time to respond, and then you agree that there will be this much time available before the fix goes public, and so it becomes public whether or not the fix is actually in place, unless there's further negotiation. But ultimately what it means is you can talk about it, and the thing is actually fixed. Another potential upside to responsible disclosure is rewards. Some companies are willing to try and make this a happier thing all around by actually giving rewards to people who discover things. For example, Google, they have a application security program in which they will actually pay you. They have a scale. If you find a tiny bug, they'll pay you $100. If you find a really huge bug, they'll pay you $20,000. This is what their scale looks like. You find a bug and then figure out where on the graph it goes, and they give you money. Somebody just really thought that they were super clever when they made the low end of the right-hand column, $1,337. Google. Facebook has a similar program. They actually have a $500 minimum and no maximum. If you find a really big bug, they're just like, we'll just pay you a giant pile of money. GitHub has kind of taken a gamified / rewardified approach where they keep a scoreboard and you can earn badges and points. But they do actually pay dollars. So as well as points and badges, you can have money to spend on things, which is cool. Other companies like Engine Yard, they have a policy that says, tell us about things, we don't ever pay you, thanks. Anyway, back to you, practical application time. What if you find a bug? So let's talk about how you can deal with that. So when you have the bug, get ready, say, oh, this is a bug. And I don't mean in software that you're writing, right? I mean if you're like using a web app written by someone else, and you're like, whoa, wait, was that wasn't supposed to happen. So ask yourself 2 questions when you see the bug. Beyond the obvious fact of like, this is clearly not working correctly, can you access something that isn't yours? Are you looking at someone else's personal information? Are you looking at someone else's invoice or receipt or, God forbid, hospital history, something that you shouldn't be seeing? Or can you disable something for other people? Like when you do that, does that mean that your friend who's trying to get to the same site no longer can? That's a problem, right? So if the answer to either of those 2 questions was yes, that's when you want to follow the responsible disclosure security informing pattern, right? Because it's not just a bug where you can write to their support and be like, your site's broken, so you know. It's a security issue where you're like, oh, this is really bad. I can see, you know, Bob from down the street's information, and that shouldn't be happening. So maybe it'll be a false alarm. Maybe they'll say, oh, it looked like a security issue, but it wasn't actually one. That'd be cool, but you should check with them rather than like go post on a forum about how broken their website is and now anyone can go see anyone's information. So contact the author of the thing before you go talk about it in public, right? It means that they can write a patch and they can test it, they can release it before everyone knows what the problem was. Depending on what it is, look for a security policy, right? Like if you want to know who to contact, hopefully, if they're a website, they'll have like a, here's how you talk about security problems. If it's just a gem, maybe they won't even have a website. Maybe there will just be an email in the gem spec. Sometimes I've worked with gems where there isn't even an email in the gem spec, but sometimes they have an email on their GitHub profile, and you can contact them that way. Ultimately, though, just work together, have empathy for the other developer. They're a developer just like you. They weren't trying to create security problems. In the end, if everything fails, and it's like a library that you depend on, and you need to keep working, you can fix it, right? In a worst case situation where the person who maintains it is completely vanished, fork it, patch it yourself, say, hey, I fixed it, here's my fork. In a nutshell, that's responsible disclosure. Kind of wrapping up, what about your gems? Show of hands, how many people in here have written a Ruby gem? That's like half of you. OK, yeah, maybe more than half. That's pretty cool. It's great that Ruby makes it so easy to release gems. Unfortunately, all of your gems, security vulnerabilities waiting to happen. I'm very sorry. So let me run you through the scenarios when it's a problem with your code and how you can be responsible from the other side, right? So, and you know, of course, if your code is perfect, don't listen to this part. And also, I have this really great investment for you later. So easy mode, it's like your coworker who discovers the problem, or someone sympathetic, right? Like you write a fix, someone else reviews it, you say, hey, it's fixed, cool, everything's great. A medium level problem is like, oh, we actually already shipped this, and someone noticed that there's a security problem, which is, that's not good. Only announce those publicly if it's safe to announce them, rather than worrying about announcing them, like fix them, test the fix, get that released, and then be like, hey, there's this problem, we fixed it, it's all good now. The really hard case is when there's a researcher who's like, I'm going to prove how cool I am. So in that case, follow the responsible disclosure guidelines really clearly so that they can't run off and tell everyone how awesome they are and how your thing is broken and it's not fixed. Ultimately, what that means is respond to them quickly, set expectations with them about how often you're going to communicate and about how long you think it'll take to fix. Don't let more than 2 days go by without some kind of communication, because researchers are really fond of saying, I sent them an email and they didn't reply for 3 days, so I went public. And then fix it and release it. And hey, that's, that, it's not actually that bad. It's kind of scary, but it's totally possible to manage. And then you actually end up better off than you were before. Your thing is fixed. No one can do that bad thing anymore. So ultimately, make it as easy as possible for people, and they will be helpful most of the time. So if you personally have a gem, put your email in the gem spec so they can contact you. If you're on a team, make a security address, maybe have a PGP key, maybe write a disclosure policy on your website. As for the big Ruby ecosystem, I've actually created a mailing list called the Ruby Security Announcement Mailing List for gems that have security issues that are any Ruby thing. There's a Rails-specific mailing list, but that turned out to not be enough once there were gems that weren't Rails that had these problems. And once you've done that, that's when you can go shopping. That's it. And actually, now that I've said that's it, I kind of lied. So I brought a second talk. And I said that I would do this during the gap so that they didn't have to come up with something to talk about. I'm really sorry if you were waiting for another song. I guess they'll do that later. Real fast, Ruby infrastructure. So I started this thing. Ruby infrastructure is really important. You need Bundler, and you need rubygems.org, and your company, however your company works, if you're here at RubyConf, I assume, that you need those Ruby tools to work, to do your job, and to make money, and for your company to work. So Ruby Together is a US nonprofit founded by me that makes all of that infrastructure stuff work. Those things that are critical to making your business function. Ultimately, we think that those shared tools should work for everybody, not just people who can afford to assign an engineer to just work on that stuff. And so we're Rubying together and making sure that everyone both has access to that and that everyone who's willing to support it is supporting the same thing that everyone uses. Every individual developer, every company, every giant company, all doing that together. We got some cool people to be on the board and decide how we're going to spend the money that we get. Sarah May, Steve Klabnik, Terrence Lee, Inez Sombra, Joel Watson, Coraline Ada Emke, and Tenderlove was a founding member, but he wound up having to do less with his time, I think he said. We have hired some cool people to work on those things. And today, this is our little roadmap thing. I hope that's readable. Yeah, it's totally readable. Awesome. So we're keeping rubygems.org up, applying security patches. It hasn't been hacked yet, anyway. That was a problem before because there was no one actually applying security patches except when they had free time that wasn't part of their job. We've paid for work on Bundler. That's meant that we've just released a new beta version of Bundler that has a much, much faster way of installing gems. We've built a server that you can run in your data center or in your office that keeps a local copy of all the gems you need so that when you bundle install, you don't have to go off to the US to get that gem every single time. You only have to do it once, and then it's in your office or in your data center. And with help from more Rubyists, we can do more stuff. That's pretty much the pitch. We have a really specific roadmap of things that we want to do that'll make everything better for everybody. And the more people sign up as members and give us money, the more we will spend that money to get that stuff done. That's the whole deal. We're a nonprofit, so in the US for sure, and here I believe I've heard from different people different things, but most probably it's tax deductible if you're a company. And I also have stickers if you want them. Always important. Now that's really it.